How can we balance planet, purpose, and profit? Climate protection, minimum wages, human rights, sustainability. Companies are increasingly confronted with society's moral expectations and face the challenge of meeting them under the tough competitive conditions of a globalized world. Topics such as corporate governance and CSR are booming, but many companies still find it difficult to reflect such opportunities and risks in their traditional management structures. Our first participant is Dr. Matthijs Wackernagel, who created the footprint concept in the early 1990s with Bill Rees to compare human demand against planetary and regional ecosystem regeneration. The carbon footprint portion has become the most popular variant. In 2003, he founded Global Footprint Network, a sustainability think tank, making planetary constraints relevant to decision-making. Its largest engagement campaign is its annual Earth Overshoot Day. Welcome, Matthijs. Please also welcome Iris Lampinski. Over the last 20 years, she has worked for a sustainable investment fund, founded a technology education initiative, and built a community in a global network for entrepreneurial education, among other things. With her role at B-Lab, Iris aims to further strengthen the movement for sustainable, social, and fair business in Germany. Thank you, Iris. Christian Walter is CEO and co-founder of C-Day Now, a Berlin-based startup helping businesses drive sustainability through an end-to-end ESG value creation platform, conduct ESG due diligence, and manage portfolios. Christian also helps private equity and venture capital funds to build impact-oriented strategies and portfolios so that the investments not only yield high returns, but also result in positive effects for the planet and its people. Welcome, Christian. Azuka Kehler is a Fridays for Future activist. Azuka has been politically active since the first Fridays for Future global strikes in 2019. Azuka's activism is heavily influenced by intersectional perspectives and focuses on the issue of climate justice and anti-capitalism. Welcome, Azuka. The moderator of this panel is Simona Constanzo. She focuses on integrating social inclusion, environmental sustainability, and economic development in policy discourse and development practice. She served as a manager of United Nations Volunteers UNV program, focusing on strengthening civic engagement in support of the 2030 Agenda. Over the past years, she has worked on issues related to policy advice and advocacy. Simona, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, everybody, for being part of this upcoming discussion. Thank you, Iris. Thank you, Azuka. Thank you, Matthijs and Christian, for being my guests today. I would like to speak to you about the topic of planet, purpose, and profit. And I even spoke recently with our keynote speaker in advance, Petra Künkel from Club of Rome. She said, well, this is quite old-fashioned title because we should rather talk about planetary boundaries and the possibilities of that exists, and that planet, purpose, and profit still says something like there's a conflict between the three lines, but it is not. You have to think, you have to combine all these aspects. And I know that you are coming from different points of view, and therefore I'm quite interested about your opinion. Maybe I can start with you, Matthijs, because you're also connected to the Club of Rome. And in its latest report, I just read some parts of this. It says that humanity is not lost; it can still save itself. But one problem, besides all these ecological problems, is a certain societal problem that we are missing a certain kind of a inability to distinguish between facts and fiction. So there's a kind of societal rupture there. And what does this mean for our sustainability debate?
Thank you, Elmer, and it's wonderful to meet you, Azuka, Iris, and Christian. I would say actually the origin of the challenge is how we hold the entire story. Al Gore, with his Inconvenient Truth, brought the climate debate very prominently into the conversation. However, the title Inconvenient Truth has stuck in our mind, and I think that's how people think about the problem, that they think the more they know an inconvenient truth, the more you know, the worse you're off. The more you know about climate change, the more you have to suffer and give yourself up, etc. And so there's no incentive to learning more about it. And so I think that's kind of where in a funny conversation. And actually would say it's the exact opposite, because never have we known more about the future. We don't know everything about the future, but we know that people want to eat and sleep and be happy and be safe, etc. And we also know that there will be more climate change and resource constraints in whatever scenario we can imagine. If we accept that, then the question becomes, why don't you prepare yourself for that future? Because if you're not prepared for that future, you won't be prepared. So for a company to not prepare for that future is just economically absurd. And so we can turn it around and say, actually, in reality, what will become valuable in the future? If you think about it from a company, which kind of companies will be needed in the future we can anticipate? And it becomes quite obvious that those who can actually help humanity live well within the planetary constraints will be more valuable. So actually there's a very strong link between true business strategy and ecological necessities. Those, if you expand them as companies, will get a global overshoot down. So those, like, for example, you double the company and then actually you can measure overshoot of the world is going down. They, on average, will financially be much stronger than those who require ever more resources in a world that is overstretched already. So that means strategy, like core strategy for business, and ecological necessities are much, much more aligned than people think. They think so the biggest hurdle is to break out of this kind of mental prison of inconvenient truth to believe the more we know, the more we have a burden. It's not about burden. It's about recognizing context. The better you recognize context, the better you can make decisions that actually will serve you and serve society.
I have to pass your question, thank you very much, or your answer to Christian. And because Matthias spoke of what becomes valuable in the future, and you as an investor, I'm sure that's what you're looking for as well. And so asking you, how do you see this development?
Well, it's certainly true at least what I see at this point is, given that there is a global economic downturn, that particularly when we're looking at early stage investments and climate technology investments, that there's no downturn really. It's the same for ESG. This is certainly protected. The same is true for healthcare. I mean, COVID has shown how important this is. So I think there are certain industries that are kind of protected, so to speak, at least for the moment. But the issue, I think, is to a certain extent that we also as investors, or even actually, especially as investors, we have to think in the term of growth. And there's a singular growth. It's an economic growth, and it's not a growth in societal capital or purpose or people growth. And I think that's the bigger issue. So while certain industries are protected, behind that is a growth component, right? GDP has to grow, whatever has to grow. And I think that's the policy behind that. And I think that is actually what we have to address.
When we talked about the inconvenient truths, Asuka, the last two speakers, for me, were a little bit argumenting how to repair the system. And I know that many of you at Friday for Future say, no, it's about changing the system. It's about really thinking it from opposite perspective. So how do you see this inconvenient truth?
I mean, I would, at least to a certain extent, agree to what both Mathis and Christian said before me. I just think about the point of that we need to change the system fundamentally. I believe that's a long-term view. I agree totally on the point that short-term we first need to fix what is fixable to reach at least a stable status quo we can build up upon to reach a fundamental change, because I honestly don't see how we can, from how the economy and the governments are shaped right now, we can just reach fundamental change into an economy that functions on different principles than it does now. But actually another point I wanted to address on what Matt said, or it's more like a question from my side. You said that there's an inevitable link between the change of our environment and the profit of the companies in what is valuable in the future. Well, I agree on that, and I think that this realization should be known to most people who are work in this kind of area. But I'm wondering, if I look at big companies for example BP, Shell, or anything around that kind of industry, what is their vision for the future? Because I cannot believe that they're not aware of this link, that their models are not sustainable for the future, but they still keep on going this way, and we don't see any signs of change. So I have to wonder, they may have a different vision how the future world should or is going to look. And I see a discrepancy there, so I would like to hear your opinion on that, actually.
That's an awesome question, Asuka. And I mean, I'm an engineer by training, so I think more about natural sciences. And the question of overshoot, that we use more than Earth can renew, overshoot will end. No question. The question is only whether it ends by design or by disaster. And by ignoring that reality, that context we live in, it's not going to go away. It's not an optional choice whether we accept that context or not. That's the context we operate in. So those companies that stay blind to this context, they opt for the disaster route. And not just disaster for the world, but disaster for themselves, because they won't have a value proposition. Their value proposition erodes. If they're not offering something that will be able to operate in the future we can anticipate, and this future is coming much more rapidly than our physical infrastructure seems to be able to adapt. You cannot just switch yourself in the last second. You need to prepare yourself for that future in time. It's hard to see, on average, how companies who are not recognizing that context, who are not adapting their business model to what actually will be needed to operate, will be able to be successful. And that also means financially successful. So, for example, just to make it very silly, for example, a car company, if it gets bigger, builds more cars, and overshoot will go up. A windmill company will take resources as well for the windmills to build, but then if it displaces coal power, overshoot actually goes down. So for me, on average, it seems that the windmill, this is a silly example, the windmill companies compared to the car companies just stand on a much better leg to actually stay valuable. And that's important for society because they're taxpayers, and it's important for the company, it's important for everybody. So value means that you're able to operate, that you're able to provide streams of services. And so that's why I think physical reality and that basic business strategy is much more aligned, and if you choose as a company to be blind to it, that's to your own detriment. That's my view.
But we have to change the way we used to make business. This, I think we all agree on this, and this brings me to introduce Iris. And I know that just a couple while ago, I read a sentence from a founder of B Lab, J. Cohen Gilbert, and he said more or less that you folks are looking for systemic change, and he said that the business model or the of the 20th century has failed in his opinion, and we're now looking more for shareholder capitalism instead of stakeholder capitalism instead of shareholder capitalism. So this is a little bit one of these motivations of B Corp. So when we again talk about the inconvenient truths that Mattis mentioned at the very beginning, what is your answer or your recommendation to this inconvenient truths?
I think I wanted to mention two things. I think the first thing, what both Asuka and Mattis said, is like, I think if we've learned anything during the pandemic, you can pretend a pandemic doesn't exist, but that doesn't mean you won't get hit by it. So I think in a way there's this positive realization, like, yes, there is a discourse between fact and fiction, and we all know social media, but like there are certain facts and realities that even if you a powerful government, that you can't hide for a certain point of time. And I do think that helps this whole discourse around where we stand with planetary boundaries, because I think people are realizing like we can't keep pretending certain things and we need to face certain things. I think that's my first comment. I think in terms of the evolution, like there was this story around that, the only thing that matters is profits and shareholder capitalism will save us. And I do think that discourse, quite clearly, most people nowadays have moved away from that because it leads to short-term, maybe profits, but then like quite clear consequences that are unbearable. I think the idea of systemic change is that really there are different steps to that. What you can quite clearly see is that, companies are realizing, as Matta said, that they have to prepare for the future, because that's the whole nature of, where companies are going. There is still a tension between short-term, mid-term and long-term. What many of the B Corps are doing is they're really trying to orientate what they do towards positive impact. As a minimum, managing like negative risk, but like most of the B Corps are now saying, okay, we actually want to have a positive contribution. And I think that in a way is like the whole aspect of regeneration is a much more positive story than like just facing an inconvenient truth. And if you see how, for example, like a few weeks ago, the founder of Patagonia effectively donated the whole company to a certain purpose, that might be a more long-term outlook of how companies could operate and how they can redefine their purpose. So it's still, I would say, very much patchwork, but I think that's the idea, to say it's like, can people push forward the agenda to move away from short-termism?
Christian, Mattis and the others mentioned that this kind of overshoot or exploiting too much resources and overconsumption has no future. On the other hand, I would say modesty brings bad business results. And so how do you handle this in discussions with your companies?
I mean, the way we invest is along an impact narrative, right? So we actually have measures in place to ensure that these companies are creating positive impact and are reducing the negative externalities, essentially. So for us, within our investment thesis, at the end of the day, we focus very much on companies that can reduce CO2 emissions in particular. We also look obviously at things like diversity, inclusion, right? Proper policies in place, and so forth. So if you will, along the people, planet, profit narrative. And I believe that's what everybody should do. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And where we actually then interact with other investors that are also invested in companies we work with and that have a different narrative, then we have very difficult discussions sometimes, because other funds do not use the same metrics we use. They do not encourage companies to, for instance, become a B Corp member. And then we are very quickly in the short term. Right? If you look at venture capital in particular, companies are very young. That's growth for any price. You have, as an investor, usually 10 to 12 years to return your fund. So you have to actually you have to push companies to grow as quickly as possible and to raise as fast as possible. That's just the reality of our industry. And on the other hand, the expectation on us is then very often to say we can create less profits because we are modest or more modest or have different expectations. And I think that is where we have to convince people that actually the profits, as Matt said at the very beginning, right, they come from companies that act more sustainable. And that is the long-term solution, and that will create better returns for funds. But it's a slow process. Like Asuka said, there's no way to turn the ship completely within a day or two, right? This needs constant pressure in these kind of discussions.
I think later I would like to talk more in detail about this aspect of walk the talk. But first I would like to pass the question to Asuka. So Christian mentioned that they are looking at climate strategies and other aspects of transparency that make that distinguish companies. But if I look at companies all over the world, almost everybody's telling they're doing something for climate change. So nobody says we're not doing enough, nothing. So all of them say they do something. All of them can show some data, and so planet must be on a perfect road, but it's not. And we still have the reality is different, and I think Mattis can confirm this. That the Earth Overshoot Day is year by year earlier, and so how do you discuss and how do you handle the gap between talking and reality of companies?
So that's actually a very big point in our daily activism, I guess, because of course the gap is absolutely huge, and most of the times we usually just assume that the things the company says about themselves is not equivalent to the truth about them. But luckily there is a broad network of NGOs and different groups who just focus on researching the actual facts upon a lot of companies, especially the bigger global players, which are the most important and the biggest emittents globally. So actually on those corporations you can find more accurate facts if you know where to look for them. So so what we try to do often is just as good as we can expose those lies if we run a campaign against a certain company or a certain bank. For example, we had a company against the Standard Chartered Bank last year, I think, or last 2 years actually, which was somewhat successful, at least in some countries. But it's very annoying to say the least, because of course even if we activists know what actually is true, it's incredibly hard to communicate that to the general public, especially if you're up against a tech giant who has millions and billions of funds to launch any kind of campaign against them. So the way we go usually is pinpointed, very media effective actions to try to bring a certain issue about one company to the light and try to take them down from that singular point. That's the way we go, that we try to go often. But the success rate differs very strongly.
Mattis, I would like to pass this question a little bit to you. You spoke about an inconvenient truth. I may add a cynical truth. And the cynical truth is that the best thing for climate change in the last years was the pandemic. Yeah. So, and it worked much better than most of any political or economical climate strategy. Why is it so hard to walk the talk?
I'm not sure how beneficial COVID was. There was a short retraction in consumption, but overall, I think it also detracted us systemically from saying what kind of a future do we actually need and build that one. The same we see now with the Ukraine war, like the pressure of actually resource constraints being much more imminent, whether we are reacting in a way that builds a systemically better future, for example, for the European countries. I'm not totally convinced yet, but I think the conversation is happening. So just to be clear, when I mean inconvenient truth, I do not think we are stuck in an inconvenient truth. Inconvenient is actually the opposite. By thinking inconvenient, we think it's not helpful to understand and we shy away from it. As long as we don't see ourselves in the game, it's very hard to act. I think the biggest leverage we have as thinkers in the field, which we are here, in some ways we're trying to shift the conversation, is to become much more specific what we actually mean by impact. When we just stay in general terms, we may not get to the high leverages. I think the key question really is to recognize that climate change is not an isolated phenomenon. It's connected with all other resource demands. It's climate change plus the resource constraints that emerge from the climate the climate pressure that we are in. If that's so, if that's the new context, then the question is not so much what does a company emit. Even more important is what does the company offer to the world. It's about their services. We have to look at the whole package, not just how much is emitted by the company. That's one part, but the services and goods that they provide, how are they affecting overall outcome? So to us, the big question really is, in the end, are companies adding to global overshoot through their products and services in their existence? Like if you double the company, would overshoot go up or would it go down? Now, very few companies exist where overshoot goes down when you expand them. And that's where we need to focus on, because that's what we need to expand as an investment group. Let me give you one example. On average, worldwide, for every dollar value add in the world right now, it takes 2.5 square meters ecologically productive space to provide the services to actually make that economic activity happen. 2.5 square meters of ecosystem services, you could say, on average. We just worked with a company in Germany that does recycling at large scale. It's a $1 billion company. They reduce overshoot for every dollar value add they produce, or euro, which is not about the same, by about 28 square meters. So 10 times more in the right direction. It's kind of this thinking that we need to amplify and tell the world. If you want to have a chance in the future, you need to do things that actually produce value to humanity. It's not just kind of saying this is not just essential for humanity, it's essential for the business, because a business cannot change its infrastructures, its market, its products within like the snap of a finger. It takes time, and those who are not preparing themselves just will kind of increasingly be crunched. So I think we need to tell the stories more effectively, more poignantly, and saying where actually is there the overlap between self-interest, to say, but it's the self-interest of a city, of a country, of a company, and the common good. And I think the overlap is much, much, much stronger. To me, to use perhaps a crude metaphor, we're standing on a train track, and the train is coming at high speed towards us, and we quibble about, should we get an extra €5 to get off the track? I think as society, or we have been able to have the conversation to actually recognize to what extent dealing with these climate issues is not just a nice action for humanity. If China, for example, wouldn't act, then for Germany it becomes even more essential to prepare itself, because the context is going to shift even faster. And we are playing the game as if we wait for everybody else. Oh, as long as China doesn't do much, we won't do much. That's an absolutely economically insane position from our perspective. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever economically. But that's the conversation that is still dominant.
Iris, if we know something today to pick up these arguments, then it is that these challenges we see are not isolated. Everything is interconnected. And what's needed, if I may summarize what was said before, is a kind of transparency, a clear commitment, and a clear tone from the top, for companies to say, okay, we change the course. And I know you folks are working with many companies. It sounds so easy: transparency, clear commitment, tone from the top. Why isn't that easy in real life?
I think it's not easy because it's not easy to shift, especially for I think there is a difference between companies that are started and have been founded from scratch with a certain mission and a certain purpose, and it's a very different story to shift as an existing company. What we see is that if you want to have permanency in a shift like that, you can't do it without the top. That's also where certain processes just stop. So I think it's there is a practice piece where people can actually evolve. If you want to shift a whole company, you have to get buy-in from the board. You have to get buy-in from shareholders, and that is sometimes not happening where people start a certain journey and then the top actually says, no, we didn't want to be so serious about it. We wanted to do a little bit less. So I do think that struggle is there, and I don't think it's an easy journey to do. I think, with any of those things, it's I don't know if it's good progress, but you might remember a few years ago, there was still this huge debate. Is it actually real, and should we worry about it at all? I do think we've moved beyond that point. Yes, that certainly could have happened faster, but I think the point we're at now is not, does it exist and should we think about it? It's much more, people are asking themselves the question, how do we do it? How can we address it? How fast can we address it? So I do think, I don't know if that is, sufficient progress already, probably not. But there is the shift, and now I think there is the shift to really say, okay, how can we push it forward without being distracted? I think what Mate said is yes, I think the side effect obviously is there's always something else coming on that might justify not moving as fast as you want, or finding another short-term solution. So I think it's a hard challenge to really push forward. Yeah. I'm not sure that answers your question sufficiently, but it's if it was easy, obviously everyone would be doing it. But it does require, I think, different people pushing in different spots.
Very good answer. And I would like to pass it to Christian, because what you described is the problem, that we have to leave familiar paths, and what we will see is something like a terra incognita. And I know, Christian, at the beginning you mentioned they mentioned, of course, inflation, energy crisis, and all these things. So for most business leaders I talk to, they say, well, this is a good excuse for postponing now sustainability topics and say, okay, we do it later because I have bigger problems right now. And so how can you make it attractive for companies when you have discussions with them to say, yes, jump into the cold water. It's okay. The future will be bright, and everything will be good.
Well, I provide money, so it's an easy fix. But then that's actually also the problem. I think there's always an excuse. To postpone something or not do something. But at the end of the day, I think, I believe that people are good, that they don't necessarily want to hurt the planet. I think most people have a very good intention in what they do. And everybody realizes that this change is just necessary. And if we can help, or if they can get help on this path, usually they will take it, because everybody personally is affected in one way or the other, right? We might have all a different idea on what is sustainable. And I'm not necessarily talking about climate change here, right? For some, it's a diversity issue. For some, it's a supply chain issue, and so forth, right? Everybody has their own experiences, but to a certain extent, everybody has been touched by the topic. Everybody has unjustness experienced to a certain extent. And if you can actually break the problem down to something highly personal, I think that helps to understand and act. To a certain extent, I believe that the problem we have with climate change in particular is that we're talking about problems of the commons, so to speak, right? You can't feel this. You can now see this, but for a very long time, you cannot really touch how much CO2 is in the air. This is quite abstract, and I think that makes it very difficult. So you have to break it down to something that is more personal. And I think, particularly in Fridays for Futures, you can now see this, right? Because the future of that of the generation greater, I'm simplifying here, obviously, is at risk. Like, it's potentially that this will be the first generation that cannot live the way we have experienced in our lives so far. And that's very, very personal. And so it's obvious that there has to be change. And a lot of people that start companies now at that age, they are aware of that, and they have much, much more purpose implemented in their companies right from the get-go. And so what Iris said, it's much easier then to hold course because it's implemented in the core of the company. And I think that's what we, to a certain extent, have to support, and that change we have to drive. Because it's a generational issue as well to change the system, right? As Asuka said at the beginning.
So, Asuka, how radical steps can companies be expected to take?
Well, I guess it kind of depends on how realistically you think, or on how strong you want to preserve the current system. Because even though I said at the beginning that I do agree that change cannot come immediately, and it's gonna take time to transform the system, we do not only have the issue of like my own future or like the future of my friends or the people I work with. I mean, sure, we're probably gonna have some issues, but we're still living like in a global north, in a country that is economically strong. we're not going to face the harshest of troubles, and at the same time there are people dying in countless other countries because of climate change right now. Like friends of mine, people I work with, are living in countries where they're actively endangered to die through the climate crisis, or like through corporations who are killing the activists there. So I think the question is, and I get general feel that when we talk about the change through through companies, we take a very long vision, and that might work for us, but that won't solve the actual problems we see right now in the world. So I would disagree with what Christian said, like that people are in the end, or most of the times, good and want to do good for the planet. I do not think so. I think most of the people, especially in like big companies, might have a more egoistical or nihilistic view on things, which prevents them from doing more things. Well, of course, if it's more personal, they will act more urgently, but we don't have the time to wait until it gets more personal, and our communication to make things more personal is limited. We can make matters more personal, but then it doesn't convey the same weight of the reality other people have to face right now. And we can't convey that there are people dying somewhere and make it in a personal issue if we don't take, because that's just not possible for us to communicate in a way to make that reality truly understandable for any of us who don't have a direct connection to those people, to those countries. So it's not necessarily. I think the question, how radically can we expect the economies to act? I don't think that question can be answered, because it really depends on what your goal is, what you're trying to reach, how you understand the current issue and the current situation of the world. So like my personal answer would be, they have to focus their entire their entire might into this issue. But of course that is completely unrealistic. So I think that's an unanswerable question, to be honest.
For many, this transformation comes very too fast now, and then they would like to have a more slower approach to this. But I know other people say now we have to make this fast changes. So therefore, I would like to pass this question to Mattis.
I'm giving away my age by saying I was 11 years old when the oil crisis hit. That was like a stunning moment for us. In Switzerland, we had 3 car-free Sundays, and we could bicycle on the highway. And I thought, my God, there will be a totally different future without fossil fuels. That will happen. It may take a long time. It may take 10 years, I thought, as a child. You know? And now we are like 50 years later, and we are as dependent on fossil fuels, if not more. We have doubled our fossil fuel dependence. It's quite stunning how little has happened. Perhaps the most painful lesson for me personally, like also because I've been in that field, is I think to realize, painful is kind of more just I wish I had the insight earlier, is that information is useless unless it's empowering to the audience. So if it's not empowering, they will just use all their brain, all their abilities to fight it, find ruses, find excuses, and as you try to overcome excuses, they invent 5 more excuses. You know? So how do we find a way to say, wow, this is really truly necessary for you? And if we have that way of communication, we can unleash things much better. I think we are stuck. When I say we are stuck, urban privileged people, as we are all here on this call, urban privileged people, we're stuck in this idea that we are not in the game. I think it's different, Asuka. I really like how you said that. Me and my friends, we're exposed. Most people that are in decision-making opportunities, like I am, like in the older ages, urbanites, basically have this sense, yeah, it's a tragedy, poor Maldives, poor others. They don't see themselves in it as much. Cities talk about, like, what can we do for climate? Which I think is the ultimately silly question. I'm just using cities now as a scapegoat, because the question really is, why are cities destroying themselves for the future we can anticipate? Every euro spent for every budget that is not preparing the city to live with the future that will very, very soon be without fossil fuels, with climate change, with far less biological resources overall. If you as a city don't prepare yourself now, your infrastructure is so slow. You will be in a very difficult position. So I think the mindset of cities, and you can apply that to companies or countries, not to recognize how quickly the future comes to us and how relevant it is, even if you now have high income streams, as in Germany, that may actually fiddle away if you don't have the resources to maintain these machineries that produce these euros, is so utterly naive. I'm really surprised. I was on a ZDF show with a key advisor to the German government around resources after Russia invaded Ukraine, and one of his main arguments he said is, "Oh, Germany just emits 2% of the CO2 emissions." I mean, how insane is that? In some ways, because we depend on resources to make our economies move, and if our economies are not shifting, the loss will be tremendous. So I think not recognizing that is one thing. So how can we explain that in ways say, wow, you really have skin in the game. Information I bring to you is so helpful for you to be able to operate much better in the future we can anticipate. So I think we need to shift. But if you just ask people for commitment, they just say, oh, how nice can you be to the world? We don't see much action. If we are able to speak more to the relevance, why is this information necessary for them to understand, to also be able to operate their own city, their own country, their own company, I think we're in a much stronger spot. But much of the conversation, even at UN level, I think, even in the name of nationally determined contributions, is still kind of this sense of, oh, how nice are you willing to be for humanity? And then people have beautiful speeches, but the action is weak. So I think, summarizing it again, if we can make our conversations far more empowering, in the sense of saying, why is this information helpful for you to actually make that shift, I think we can have much more leverage. And that's what I'm trying to get better at myself.
If I
So
may say something, sorry, can I say something on this? Because, Matthias, you said something, you made the city scapegoats, but it's actually, I mean, it's mostly concrete and steel, right? If you will. So we have, I think, in Germany, the real estate sector makes around 30% of the emissions, 40% of the energy usage. We have roughly 40 million buildings in Germany, of which at least 19 million need to have an energy renovation. Okay, so they are inefficient in order to actually get close to the climate goals within that sector. They all need to be renovated. 19 million buildings. Currently, we renovate 1% per year. That is the problem we have, and we do not have enough people to actually do this kind of work. So even if these cities now start preparing, right, and doing these kind of things, the amount of work necessary to energetically reduce CO2 in just this one industry is massive. This is a massive challenge. And so if actually we would have needed to start when the first report of the Club of Rome came out, because then we theoretically would have the chance. Now this is becoming more and more difficult. And in Germany, we are talking mostly about existing buildings. If you are going to Asia or developing countries in general, this is new build. New build with concrete and steel is one of the worst things we can do to this world. And so we have to keep this in mind, right? And it's a massive problem that we are facing, because you cannot, any developing country, forbid to actually grow. Right? What we messed up here in the global north, we cannot say, well, you cannot have the comfort that we have here, just because we are now facing a climate crisis. And that's the other point on this whole thing. And I think we have to keep this in mind when we talk about this, because it's not only about will, it's also about, can we actually move the needle in these particular fields as well? And yes, a lot of that is in the energy sector, sure. But at the end of the day, if we today power down Shell and all the big oil majors, then we have another problem, because then, as we can see right now in the discussion in Germany on energy prices, we will have a completely different problem, and it's going to be very, very cold this winter. So it's super difficult to create this transition, because everything is completely interlinked. And I think we also have to keep this in mind when we are speaking about this topic.
So it's not just the question of the will; it's also the question of capacity sometimes. And I would like to pick up this very, very good argument and ask Iris. So when we talk, for instance, about this energy crisis right now, so here in the north, as Matthias said, we are in a privileged position. We are in a certain way used that, let me say, the state will fill the gap, and that it will cushion all life risks. When we look at other parts of the world, especially after the COVID crisis, which also cost a lot of financial resources, how is the situation? How do you, as a B Corp initiative, see the situation in many other countries? How can we finance, and how can we find enough will to organize the transformation in these southern countries?
I think that there are probably two ways to look at it. One is sort of the negative one to say is there is no way we can tell people how to change. I do think in many countries, I know like one country better than others, and that's Burkina Faso. I think the only hope we have is that we can leapfrog certain things, and I do think in some parts of the world it's like the path that we're on. We have the difficult story to tell that, we were not on a good path, even though we've been telling that story for a long time to people. I can imagine, if you think about your renewable energy, if you think about where can you actually invest in the future of renewable energy, where do you have like lots of sun and you can generate huge amounts of hydrogen, that those countries could really benefit from. And then the other thing that obviously, if you look at youth, maybe Europe is not the place to look at. So if you have any dividend in terms of demographic, it's also in those countries. That's again also a massive challenge, but I think if we're telling there is a positive impact about how to shift the economy and how to start new things, I think those parts of the world, Africa in particular, are also a massive hope to manage that transition. I don't think we can stick on the narrative that we need to tell them what to do. I think they will hopefully help us to solve that problem, because we need them to help with that. But I think it's a very hard shift in terms of narrative, and yeah.
Asuka, in the new Club of Rome publication, they describe different scenarios, and I would like to mention two of them. One is the perfect one, the giant leap scenario, where we really do take the knowing we have and do the right things. And the other, probably more realistic scenario, unfortunately, right now is the too little, too late scenario. So where we see everybody says, yes, we are doing something, and to be honest, they are doing something, but not enough. And at the end, the result will be that we will not gain the goals we mentioned. So how do you see this when we look at different parts of the world and in different conditions right now, also in the background of the political and situation? How do you discuss this at Friday for Future?
Well, it's not necessarily just how we discuss it in Fridays for Future, but like the climate justice movement in general, I believe. I think like we see the reality, as you said, the more realistic scenario of too little, too late, because that is what we are experiencing right now, what we have experienced for the past, I don't know how many years. But still, of course, we kind of hope that somehow a giant leap would be possible, even though we know it's unrealistic. And I think, like, Iris said something really, really good. I want to definitely pick up on that. Like, we need African, Asian countries to help us solve the crisis. And I believe that if that scenario would be possible, there would be something that could be considered somewhat into the direction of a giant leap. But to make that even possible, the issue right now is a lot of countries don't have any the money or any resources to do the transition themselves in their own countries. But the issue there is most of them don't have the resources because they're getting exploited by other countries, by the US, for example, by Europe. And there is actually a very new, promising campaign in the movement right now. It's called Debt for Climate, which advocates for the debt cancellation of the countries in the global south, to give them the independence to actually rebuild their own countries in a more progressive way, which can actually tackle climate change. And I believe there would be one way, a giant step towards something that could be considered a giant leap to give those countries this independence. But the issue with that, of course, is that the global north has to take a hit to their own industry to make that possible, and that's again where it becomes unrealistic, where we have to push, because no scenario, I believe, which should lead to something that is not a complete climate disaster, is to make that possible. It is necessary that the global north has to take the majority of the impact. That we have to accept that we're gonna lose parts of our economy, our countries will get economically weaker. We have to accept that truth, because I don't believe that it is possible to make it in a time frame a change where that doesn't happen, because we have the resources, we have the money, but we are using it to hold up a system that is not capable of making the change that we need. And I think that is an inconvenient truth somewhat, that we have to accept that we're gonna like have to face some kind of hardship in the future, no matter what happens. Because even if we don't do that, and endure that like harder period of time for now, we're gonna face much worse the consequences in the future because we did too little too late. So yeah.
Iris, so when governments are, let me say, governmental options are limited, companies have to step in. And this is a little bit what B Corp also says. They promote companies as a force for good. But do companies then have to redefine their right to exist?
I'm not sure. Like, it depends, like, how companies have defined why they existed in the first place. I do think you find a lot of companies that have defined already in the past that like their pure existence had a purpose, and was beyond, just making money. I think you find very few people that like the self-image of a lot of, family-owned business, etc., is not just like purely saying, we want to make money out of it, but we want to make a contribution to the world. I do think that requires a revisit and a reshape on many levels. And at least what we are seeing is like there are like, more and more companies that want some structure and some process on that journey of rethinking where to go. But yeah, as I said, like I think it's a question. It's like it's more about what was the self-image of people before, and where do they want to go now? And at least like anecdotally, like we've talked to people who said like we never worried so much like about how we should invest in the future as a family focused on climate change, but now realizing it's like if we want to pass it on to the next generation. And I do think like with the B Corp movement, you see a lot of family-owned businesses, because there you don't want to be the last generation to run the business. That is often quite a strong driver. So I think passing that on to the next generation as a result of that, evolving it, quite often is a strong motivation. I think it really also depends on the type of company. Like they're very different outlooks of companies. I think the hardest group of companies are publicly listed companies that are under immense pressure to really provide quarterly results. They're probably harder than any other group to address in terms of pressures. And obviously pension funds are trying because they obviously have much longer time horizons. But I think that is a really tricky relationship. That publicly listed companies maybe have even more than family-owned businesses.
So Christian, what was Iris mentioned was that family businesses, it's easier for them to maybe to adopt to the future. But I would again raise the question a little bit to you as well. Business as a force for good. I think as an ESG investor, you will foster companies who argue in this direction. But no less, I would like to ask you about your opinion. Honestly, if we say, okay, business must save the world, business must do this because state has no money, state has no capacities. Honestly, maybe that's true, but companies do not have democratic legitimation to do this. And I don't think that the world, let me say, shaped by businesses, let me say, like privatization of education, to give an example, or privatization of health system. We saw that during the COVID-19 crisis is not always the best way. So where's the limit as business as a force for good, as companies who have to engage in society? But where's also, let me say, where does it end, and where do they have to say, okay, I'm out?
Yes, a very good question. I'm not sure I have an answer to this. I don't believe that businesses should take over everything. I think, particularly right now, again, it's times of crisis can teach you a lot of lessons, I guess. Germany has just basically deprivatized Juniper. And I think there are certain topics that are should probably be or are better off in the hand of the government to provide a baseline of service, right? We can argue to what extent, but if we are thinking about energy, if we are thinking about healthcare, I think topics generally where we need a baseline of services to enable society to function and for everybody to have a certain well-being. I think it's better in a democratic hand, so to speak. I think the role of government should be to guide businesses to be sustainable and to provide services or be good to a certain extent and provide limits to exploiting the country or the world in general. I very strongly believe that. I do not believe that the market will solve problems to the benefit of the people. As Iris said, the biggest problem is probably in listed companies, and I think that is this is the most capital driven, or these are the most capital driven companies, right? As long as we do not have actually non-financial criteria and financial criteria on the same level, I think this is not going to change. And for companies that are in family owned, this is very different. I actually used to work for Fissmann. That's a heating company that's family run for more than 100 years now. And this company has been in the media for several times for actually the social, or in recent times also for the climate impact or the positive climate impact they have. And I think empowering all those or those family businesses or businesses that are not so much in the focus is much, much more interesting to a certain extent as well, because they are rooted in the local ecosystem very often. There are people that care much more because they are much, much more directly affected from the return of the company. And at the same time, behind every listed company are hundreds and thousands of those private companies. We often forget that because they are not in the media and they have a massive effect on what we can actually do. And empowering those companies, I think that's probably something governments should do much, much more. I mean, here in Germany, we say that the Mittelstand is the most important, is most important, right, for our economy. If the Mittelstand works, then the country works. And I think that's where, for me, maybe not the solution, but the way forward is to actually enable those companies to function, to help those companies to become sustainable, and double down basically on what they sometimes, particularly for local communities, do anyway.
Matthias.
I think it would be useful just also to focus on where does our demographics, that like where we speak here, have the largest power. I mean, we are in slightly different roles. Christian is more in the investor role. Asuka is running campaigns. Iris is thinking with companies about how to think about their own purpose, etc. Where is the biggest power? I still think it is by being sharper and clearer in our communication about aspects that are specific, but also empowering. I see still too much conversation in those demographics that actually could be sharper. For example, focusing on saying, oh, we need like SDGs and all that. SDGs is wonderful, they exist, but they're still, unfortunately, negatively correlated with ecological sustainability. Strongly negatively correlated with ecological sustainability. They're not strong enough. There's so many, everybody can say, oh, I contribute to goal 7 or 5 or whatever, and doesn't have that much meaning. If you use the word sustainability, it's a domain. It's not really that clear what it means. But if we start to get specific about where we think the value proposition is, I think we can actually drive change more effectively and more empoweringly. So that's, I'm repeating again, but I think in some ways saying, to what extent are companies actually, as they expand, reducing global overshoot? That becomes very specific because it looks at overall, are they contributing or not? And also linking that to the value proposition by saying, we believe that actually these will be more valuable. So that's good for the company and it's good for society. So I'm saying that more in terms of specificity. If we are much clearer about what actually society needs to get there and why that's good for society and why that's good for the company, and be specific and make that measurable, we can feed more change. If we continue to be more blurry, we actually encourage greenwashing, which I think is happening a lot with the SDGs in some ways. It's, oh, we contribute a little bit. Oh, we are adding some carbon fibers to our car. We must be contributing to some kind of a SDG. And just adding fog and confusion to the conversation. As an engineer, I think it's actually quite simple. Like engineers are asked to build bridges. When you build a bridge, you just find out, is it strong enough to carry the truck that needs to drive over the bridge? And if not, you say it's not strong enough. Now, in the same way, we can actually make very specific recommendations. It's not about are you optimistic or pessimistic. The engineer just says it's not strong enough. If it's not strong enough, there's a consequence. You know, either you don't let the truck drive over the bridge or the bridge collapses. I mean, it's kind of, it's within that realm. And I think in the same way, if we can really show the essentiality of saying, is our country, is our city, is our company, is it fit for the future that we can anticipate with quite a lot of clarity? It becomes not just kind of this religious talk about saying, do you believe in climate change or not? It's a betting question. Are we betting on the right horse? And are we kind of preparing ourselves for what we can anticipate? And so it becomes empowering and meaningful and sharp. And I think we align the forces. Because we need a fast transformation. I think that we all agree. And I think the question about what is realistic, I mean, it depends what kind. Is it politically realistic or is it physically realistic? And in the end, physics bats last. You know, so we need to make sure, actually, like to say, you will be hit if you choose to ignore physics. Good luck. You know, it's not a choice. I mean, it's a choice, but it has consequences. You don't have to believe in physics. It's not very helpful not to. For you.
A clear narrative is the aspect, but another bottleneck I see, and I would like to pass this question to Iris first, but also to all of you. We need the people to make all this happen. And so I don't know. So I just recently read that PwC alone is looking for 100,000 or something like that, incredible amount of ESG experts in the next years. Almost every company I talk to or organization I talk to, they say, well, we don't have someone to take care for this. And I think they are not growing on the trees, these experts. And so, this bottleneck of people who are, let me say, committing the will of the company is important. Therefore, Iris, how do you see this in your context?
In part of preparation of this panel, obviously, we also got shared different things, and I think there was this one image that I saw, which was this model to say, the model in many companies now is you have a sustainability team of between 1 to maybe 3 people who expected to transform a whole company and report back on indicators, and guess what? And obviously that doesn't work as a model. So I think the only model that works is that, yes, you need some specific knowledge, but this is a whole company effort on many levels. This is really a transformation effort. And I don't think it's actually an accident that if you look, it's there's so many people I know who in the 20 years ago started in digitization strategies and how to digitalize companies, and many people are moving over towards how can we help companies transform again. I think at least I still see sort of a clear trend, and lots of people are re-educating themselves. Lots of the people we talk to who are our contacts in companies interested is they've been with the company for a long time. They might have been interested in green issues for a long time, and then the leadership of the company say, hey, you have a new job, you do this, and then they work their way through. So I think with a big shift like this, you always have you basically need everyone. You need people who can upskill, and you need new people coming in. But make no mistake, this is not like one person can turn around a company effort. And I think that's why it's also so important that it actually sits as a responsibility. You can see that actually as a trend. It's initially people start with individual things and then they realize this is too small. And I do think you can see that now in companies. They're taking this much more as a whole company effort than the sustainability department I would have seen when I worked as an analyst 15 years ago, where literally you could talk to one person and everyone else said, we've outsourced this is Mrs. Sustainability in our company, you need to talk to her. I think that model doesn't work. So I think, yes, you need people, but I think that's the whole thing around, when everyone had to start using IT, you didn't assume that it's only one person in the company who has to learn it. Everyone has.
Yeah, so perhaps in a perfect world, in a perfect future, this sustainability topic becomes as normal as an IT department become. Matthias mentioned that we're a little bit older. I remember the 80s, so when the first computers came up, so there was wow, yeah, today every company has its IT department. It's totally normal. Perhaps we will see this in the future as well, that this is normal. But nevertheless, now it is not. And so therefore, Christian, how is it for you? So actually your business model is based on valid data, yeah? So transparency. And someone has to prepare this data. And how do you experience that lack of people?
I mean, as you said, there's a joint effort within a company. Unfortunately, the reality is very often that there is one person is responsible for sustainability, and it's a little bit like talking to a wall for them. They are not empowered very often, and they have all the knowledge, and they tell very often, actually, even the C-level management, you have to do this, you have to do this, and for them it only becomes relevant then if there's actually a couple of basis points that increase. And they can't make as much revenue as they used to. And then they look at that and then it's oh, we should do something. We should have done this probably for a year or two. And out of a sudden, then consultants come in and so forth. It's a joint effort. Everybody has actually within a company usually data points. Of course, you need to bring that together. That's a different challenge. It's a challenge of digitization very often. And actually having the right KPIs to manage these kind of things. But I don't think it's within the 400,000 people, 100,000 people at PwC, Deloitte, and I don't know what to hire, right? They are very specialized on providing certain consulting services to do so. But within a company with 1,000 employees, if sustainability is really embodied, then it's a job of everyone. And then there's also it doesn't really matter in which position, right? Everybody should report the right things and should do the right thing. And I think that's the real challenge. It's not so much a people shortage as it is actually an understanding shortage for every position at a company level. You need companies to transform to actually act sustainable as a whole.
So Asuka, sustainability is the coolest career you can study. Is this common sense of your colleagues and young people, or how is it there including sustainability in job and career perspectives?
Good question, actually. I think it's different for everyone, to be honest. How much you want, or how directly you incorporate that to your vision of the future of your career. Especially since a trend I see, at least around people I hang around with, is we don't have that clear of vision of our own future, because a lot of things are just too uncertain for us to know like how will things go. So if I use myself as an example, I don't have any clue what I'm going to do after university for now. So I'm just going to go ahead and see what happens. But I think like the general notion of that environmental issues and social issues, and like including them into what you do and like into your lifestyle, that you actually care for those things and make them relevant factors in your decisions, no matter what those decisions are, is definitely a trend we're seeing, of course to a different extent. But I wouldn't necessarily say that there is a link between like, or that the link between having those factors in your life and linking it to your career is made especially often, to be honest. But that's only my personal like what I experience can be different for a lot of other people, I think. So yeah.
I would like to ask a follow-up question to Asuka first. Like, what do you study? And then also, to what extent do you think you are served by those, like, for these topics in your studies, and how would you change the curriculum given kind of what you actually know and what, yeah.
I actually cannot answer that question because I'm starting to go to university in like 3 weeks, but I'm gonna study psychology. But yeah,
awesome. Yeah.
But the question Matthias raised is very good. So it's not only about people who take care of it, but also about the quality of the know-how of the people. So yeah, especially when we talk about sustainability topics, there is a lot of thinking in boxes. Yeah, so like the 17 SDGs. So you put any topic that's related to water in this box or to other things in that box. But life is more complicated actually, and so we mentioned planetary boundaries and other aspects. So it's very much about holistic thinking and to have an adequate approach to this and to the Earth overshoot and other aspects. So what do you say to people who want to have to do this in companies or in institutions, organizations or whatever? What qualifications should they have, and how can they learn the holistic aspects of planetary boundary?
I think on some level it's not that complex. I think systems thinking, the core entry point to systems thinking is to recognize context. What's the context that's the most relevant for what we need to do? And then I'm really impressed by Asuka saying he's going to study psychology, because I think that's the biggest missing link overall. To me, I think the question is, are we able to focus ourselves on the right sorry, I have to let the dog out. On the right conversation? Are we able to focus ourselves on the right conversation, which is the question: how can we thrive within the planetary constraints that we face, and to do it psychologically astutely by at least generating 3 conditions? I think we need to help people generate the desire for that transformation. They need to want to do it. We need to help them find agency in it, so they think they can actually do something. They're part of the game. And the third one, which may be even more important, is we need to generate a sense of curiosity, because honestly, we don't know how to do it. We know it's necessary. And I think how to build a positive relationship with not knowing, that this is actually exciting. We need to figure it out together. We are needed. We're all needed to help figure out how to make this transformation. So it's all about how to engender, as I said, desire, sense of agency, and I think also a sense of curiosity. That's, I think, what's needed most. It's a process. We don't know yet exactly how to get there.
I would like to have a last round of questions for everybody of you. It's about the 2030 agenda. I remember like 2 years ago, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, "Now this is the decade of action. Now or never, we have to take action." I'm sometimes have the feeling now we have a decade of stagnation instead of action, and be for different reasons, COVID-19 and the war, of course, in Ukraine and others. But to be honest, there are further crises to show up, and so it's not the last one. So how can we maybe start with you, Asuka, as an activist? How can we, say, what do we have to do to make the importance of the 2030 agenda to save it and to give it a good boost in the next years?
Honestly, that is like maybe one of the most discussed and difficult questions that I faced from the point I started with activism and haven't really found a definite answer to yet. And I don't know if there's something like a definitive answer, because it will be compromised of a lot of different aspects and steps. Like, one thing that Fridays for Future as an approach took and is still taking is like just getting masses of people behind the cause, and if it's only for the demonstration itself, like just the mass of people to make something more public, to make it more known. But like, it's one way we've been doing things for like over 3 years by now, and the results are like, in the sense of knowledge in the society and how much to present this topic, we definitely had success. But when it comes to like real change, where you can see like the numbers change of like the carbon emissions, they still go up. So I honestly don't know I don't think I can answer this question, to be honest. I think it just has to be a joint effort of all the people in the different fields, just pushing and striving for their own way, and we don't have or should focus on like one specific point for now, I believe, because I don't see that singular target that we can target collectively with a hope for actual change. So I think we still kind of need to figure it out, and see if maybe from all of our efforts something new will emerge at some point, where we can all say, okay, that is something that we need to push forward to get to success. And that's kind of an issue, but I don't think it's something that we can solve by kind of forcing it, but have to see what comes naturally from all of our movements and works.
You're right, and I have to apologize. It was a mean question. So in a certain way, it's the 8 billion people question. So when we look at the global population. So Iris, what do you think, what will companies, for instance, in your network contribute in the next years till 2030? Do you think, or how do you discuss the challenges the 2030 agenda, the global goals are experiencing right now? Do you think we can use this decade in companies for a big shift, or is there a hidden shift, for instance, we still don't realize?
From my point of view, it's like we have to, and it's sort of happening. I think the question is just like, how can we continue doing what we're doing, and push the agenda, what Fridays for Future is doing brilliantly, to keep it in the public, to keep investing in companies that are trying to create a positive impact, maybe in the way how Matt has defined it in terms of reducing the Earth overshoot. So I think like the thing with goals is like, it's great to set goals, but the purpose of goals is not to actually hit them at that point in time, but to make progress. And, I think even if they're like, I do think it's like the only choice we have is like, even if we're behind on some of the goals, is to keep doing what we're doing and to push as hard as we can. Because otherwise, like, I think the big risk now with a lot of this debate is that people look at it and say, oh, it's futile, let's stop doing what we're doing. And I think that's exactly what shouldn't happen. And what Marta says, like, people should have agency and the feeling that they can make a contribution. If we then hit exactly that goal, with any goal setting, it's like they're a bit arbitrary, but they help us to crystallize, to act. And, I very much hope that this decade is not totally wasted, because why on earth are we here doing things? Like, we're not going to sit on our hands for the next 8 years, I guess.
Christian, when I talk to many sustainability experts, they tell me, well, it's in the hand of the investors. They have the trillions to invest. They make the change, and so it's up to you in a certain way. How do you see? And I know you folks developed ESG standards, impact aspects, and some difficult words like taxonomy and all this. But how do you think? How do you see the 2030 agenda, and what change can financial sector contribute in the upcoming years?
I think at the end of the day, the financial sector has to drive this to a certain extent. I think we need to change, or we need to clarify what ESG actually means. ESG is a risk assessment. It's not necessarily in the first place about sustainability, unfortunately. It's really the external risks the company faces and how it will affect the financial performance of the company. So we have an outside-in perspective. And I think we need to get into an inside-out perspective. So looking at what is actually the damage a company will create to the world. And based on that, then we need to make investment decisions. So in the financial sector, we speak about double materiality in that case. And we need to push this, and this needs to come from legislation to a certain extent, because as long as we will not regulate ourselves. If we can make more money, sorry, just hit something. If we can make more money, and then we will continue doing so. And I think our sector needs a push. I mean, if you look at Deutsche Bank and DWS, investment manager, right? The police showed up because they did greenwashing. Or I'm actually not sure what the point is right now, but that was a suspicion. And we need to stop doing that. We need to have things in order that we as a financial industry cannot do this and can actually contribute positively to this change, so that we are going more towards an impact framework. That's what I believe. But I also know how little the knowledge is within my industry. Most people, they don't really care for that because they're not incentivized to it. So there needs to be a massive change. But that, I think, needs to happen, because that's just how the global system works, right? And if we can then bring those several trillions into the right funds or into the right companies, I think then we will see some change, because then, and I think that's the circle of the whole conversation to what Matthias said at the very beginning, as then we will see that those companies that really contribute positively will actually be the ones that are most profitable, and then we can actually change something for the better.
So the money is there, the will is there, the companies are there, and the people are more or less there. Matthias, the Earth Overshoot Day in the next years till 2030 will be on a good track, right? Or no? So I know you don't have a glass bowl, but nevertheless, how do you see the development in the future?
I think we still haven't recognized officially that we are running a pyramid scheme of massive proportion. We are using the future to pay for the present, and the system's dependent on continuing it, otherwise the pyramid scheme falls apart. Not recognizing that broadly, that actually we have put ourselves at risk. It's not just an optional nice thing to add sustainability to the equation, but we are in an incredibly unstable situation of our own making without recognizing that it's very hard to shift. I'm really thrilled also with Ashoka representing kind of the younger generation here, that I think the conversation is starting to shift. I think the way we talked, and including me in the past, was kind of about it from the outside as spectators. And now I think the younger generation is starting to realize it's about them. So why are you killing us? So it's a totally different conversation, I think. Once we recognize that the pyramid scheme we're in is not serving us, things could shift more quickly. I still don't see that recognition very broadly. We still talk about it as if it was something about the others. And I think that's where we have power to shift away. We have our conversations at home, in our workplaces, with other companies, in City Hall, etc. It's about how we talk. And so that's why, as I said, Asuka, congratulations, you're going into psychology. It's really about recognizing how do we build motivation that we so dearly lack, because our view of the world is still kind of stuck in a perspective that doesn't serve us. We could call it like it's kind of a bit of a colonial attitude that we still think we can always get more from somewhere else because we have money. That's mathematically not replicable. It's not a very stable strategy. It's not going to serve us. And to start to recognize we are in it, it's not serving us. There's a better way forward. That's, I think, the conversation we need to have. And I think I'm glad we have the conversation here as well, exactly about this topic. And so congratulations, Elmer, for having us and opening this conversation that is so central to our ability to operate well.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have to say thank you to everybody in these contributions. It became very clear that the business as usual model is just in a way destabilizing society and the planet. So it's time for an upgrade. And today we heard a lot of good ideas of this upgrade, and now we simply we have to do it, and we should not waste more time, and this is clear. And I don't want to waste more of your time. And thank you very much. It was a very, very intense, very interesting, and discussion. I learned so many new things, and I have to say thank you, and take care, and hope to see all of you soon in live. Thank you. Bye-bye.